Perfect. So today we are back here with Jody Smith. He is a podcast coach, and as you can tell, we do not have our typical host, Corbin Cook, here with us today. So I'm going to be just talking with Jody and get some of his insight as to how a podcast can really come to grow, how you can start one out, and how it really doesn't take all that much if you do want to share something that you have to say, whether it's business, whether it's a TV show that you really like and just want to share more. The options are really endless for a podcast, whether you're doing video, audio, the sky's the limit. So, Jody, if you can kind of take us away and let us know how you got started as a podcast coach and a little bit of your background that led up to that.
I'd be glad to share. So, several years ago, I was working in a corporate headquarters job in a four-story building full of cubicles. And I really was starting to feel boxed in and wanting to do something different. And that's when I discovered podcasts. And I started listening to them. And the ones I listened to were like business oriented and entrepreneur oriented. And I would sit there in my cube as I was working, listening to these, and my brain would just start reeling with all these great ideas and things that I could be doing instead of sitting in my cubicle. So that got me interested in escaping my job. I didn't know podcasting would be a part of my job, but it really was a huge catalyst in getting me to move from the corporate world to going out on my own. When I first jumped out on my own, I've been doing websites on the side for a while. I started doing websites. And then eventually I came to a point where I wanted to do something different. And by that time, I'd become very interested in podcasting. And I met a guy through some mutual friends who actually was a podcast coach. He had been teaching people how to podcast. And so I met him, and after that I ended up taking like a month-long course from him. And from there, I've just been working on podcasts, been studying it, been talking to people, interacting with it, and eventually it turned into something I do full time.
If we can go back then a little bit, you mentioned something that kind of resonated with me where it was actually listening to podcasts that kind of gave you the idea to leave what you're doing. And while I wasn't in the corporate world by any stretch of the imagination when I started listening to podcasts, one that really spoke to me was listening to probably the most popular podcast out there, Joe Rogan Experience. I was in college, and just seeing the amount of different guests that he had on, ranging from comedians, biologists, scientists of all kinds, just really anyone and everyone that he thought was interesting, I started to realize the possibilities in life, that you don't have to go down the typical college route, go to the corporate world and, live a life that you're unhappy with, that, you can be a comedian, you can be an airline pilot, you can be a business owner and, be successful in doing so. And that's, what really got me to make that leap of faith from leaving school and into my own business. I was like, that wasn't the only thing, but it was definitely, a big factor. And, me and who I am today is just having a podcast where I wouldn't have ever been able to hear insight like that if there wasn't, those people out there recording their conversations and making it live to millions of people, So if there's something that you can talk about where a specific podcast or, something that just really resonated with you that made you kind of make that leap of faith.
Yeah, the great question. I think it was either the first or second podcast I ever listened to was called 48 Days to the Work You Love. And it's by a guy named Dan Miller. He's written some New York Times best-selling books. He's very focused on career and creative income, things like that. And every week on his podcast, he's sharing stories of people that are doing things for careers that never even occurred to me, and doing well with them and being successful. And so every week I would hear this, and it was so inspiring. I was like, well, I didn't know, I had no idea you could do that. Or it would trigger ideas. I was like, well, maybe I could do something similar to that. Um, from He gave a story, and I remember one of the early stories was a guy who actually would do dry cleaning delivery. He started his own business, and he would come to businesses around, and he would pick up the dry cleaning, and then he would bring it back like a couple days later. He wasn't the dry cleaner, but he had set up an arrangement with a dry cleaner, and so he could get like 40% off. And so he was like making six figures just picking up dry cleaning and dropping it off to local businesses, so it made it easier for the employees just to drop their dry cleaning right there at the office, and then they don't have to go by the dry cleaner. So it was a great service, and I was like, this guy's making like six figures doing this. It's something so simple.
Right.
Oftentimes I think I would get kind of just down that I have to come up with something amazing and new and something that nobody's ever done before. But just hearing stories like that, and there's hundreds of them that I heard. But it was that show that's been my favorite podcast over the years. The one that I've listened to consistently through out the years. And the cool thing is, a few years later, I never dreamed of it. Now I'm helping him with his podcast every week.
That is
so it's really cool, yeah. And he lives in Nashville, and every time I go to visit Nashville, he's got this guest house, which also has his office and stuff on his property, and he has a couple of guest rooms and everything. And I get to stay on his property. I mean, it's been amazing.
That's sounds very similar to a podcast I listened to actually, maybe when I was still in like middle school, and the guy, honestly, he's like a father figure to me. And even though I've never met him in real life, it's that connection that you can get from podcasts where people are opening up about their lives and sharing their experiences that you wouldn't otherwise get to hear. And this guy was one of the first people that realized, wow, you don't have to go, again, the traditional path that, you feel societal pressure to go down. And he started out his career, and this is a podcast called Painkiller already. I actually showed you the podcast. Not a business podcast by any stretch of the imagination. But it actually started off as a gaming podcast back when really all the hosts at that time were involved in the Call of Duty community on YouTube. And it's amazing that this guy, he was in his mid-30s and now mid-40s, and he had a great job at Cisco as a system admin, and he was making six figures, doing that job, then got into Call of Duty on YouTube. He started to see that as a viable career, and then he started making more money playing Call of Duty online, posting videos online, and doing a podcast talking about Call of Duty than he was from a systems admin job at Cisco, at that time, 10 years ago. I mean, they're still a huge company, but, they were like one of the premier companies, especially in the IT world. And then that's just now led him to a life of retirement, essentially at 40. And just the insight that he gives all of his viewers, because, I mean, starting off his career online anyways, playing Call of Duty attracts a younger audience, so a lot of people do look up to him as a father figure. And he would have series where, even though it was Call of Duty gameplay that you're watching, people would watch his videos not for that, because he wasn't exceptional at Call of Duty, but he was giving advice to fans that would send in mail, and just he would break it down as if he were like a father figure in their life. And again, it's just amazing that you have that sort of opportunity now, if you have a podcast, that you can share those types of experiences to help other people out that might be going through similar problems in their life or trying to figure it out. where can I go that I want to be, as opposed to where can I go that everyone else wants me to be. And it, again, it's just kind of amazing that we have this opportunity to do this now. Again, for not much of a budget, you can, get a couple microphones and use a computer at the end of the day. Heck, you can even use a smartphone recorder and just get started with a podcast and build it from there. Do you have any instances like that where one of your clients or someone that you've worked with has just started off low budget and just gone to see where it could go?
Yeah, so you talking about that kind of reminded me of my mentor, the one guy who taught me how to podcast, and his name is Cliff Ravenscraft. He started off, I think it was in 2005, with a little headset microphone, like Radio Shack, $19, and he just started podcasting about the show Lost. At that time, it was a popular show, and he got interested in it, and he and his wife started a podcast, and they soon built an audience around that. He was working as an insurance salesman, making like $80,000 or something. But he started building a community with this and connecting with people. And as he was talking about the show, he would talk about his own life, and he would get emails from people saying, that really meant something to me, and so that they built this really great community, and a lot of people came from all over the world for the finale. They threw a party for the finale of Lost, and people came from all over the world, and live in person. So, and then he transitioned from that into being a podcast coach and consultant, built a great business off of that, because a lot of people were asking him, hey, how do you do that? How do you podcast? And then he's gone on to, he's more in the business coaching and life coaching type arena now, all because he started off with a little headset microphone and was talking about a TV show he liked.
Yeah, I've listened to a couple TV-oriented podcasts. Big Game of Thrones fan, and so I used to, just listen to that every week. Be just excited about a podcast where people are talking about as the show itself, and that's something where now again you have the opportunity to get more content related to the areas that you like, and get that sort of information from someone else's perspective. What are some of the other types of podcasts that you have experience with besides ones related to like a specific topic, like a TV show? I'm sure it varies widely.
Yeah, I've worked with a wide variety of topics and niches, or however you want to pronounce niche. I mean, things that I never dreamed I would be helping people with. There's been like 3 different people in the dental industry that I've helped start a podcast. One is focused on dental practice management. One is focused specifically on dental implants and integrating those into a general practice.
Wow.
And the other one is it's called the Millennial Dentist, and they talk about running a practice. The guy runs a practice with his dad, and so he's a millennial. His dad's, I guess, a Gen Xer, and he talks about how that relationship works through their dental practice. I had one guy call me up, and he was embarrassed. He was really embarrassed to tell me what he wanted to podcast about. He was kind of just asking some general questions, and he was an airline pilot. He flies like to China and back, but he only works about 20 days a month. And finally, when we asked him what his topic was, he was like, I want to talk about that 60s TV show Lost in Space. All right, you can hang up now if you want to. He was expecting us to hang up on him. But I was like, no way, man, that's awesome that you want to talk about that. And then I've had people that talk about cooking, people that talk about, man, uh, rural health care, just
Wow.
things that I never would have thought of. And, I'm not even listing them all off the top of my head. It's been many over the course of the past 6 years or so.
So if we can go into that then a little bit more so you're working a corporate job, prior to doing this. What was that transition like, and what was the final straw that like, all right, I'm done with this. I just need to do my own thing.
Yeah, so I've been in that corporate job for several years, and to be honest, I had a pretty cush job. Like the last 3 years I was there, um, but the thing is, I had to be in my cube and looking busy for 40 hours a week. And to be honest with you, there was probably only about 8 hours of actual work for me to do in a given week, and there's only so much busy work you can do.
Right.
So I was getting frustrated about that, and finally I just said to my manager, I said, get HR to give me a couple of months' pay, and I'll go away. And I know they're moving some people around, and they'll open up the space for some of the people they're moving around. And to my surprise,
They went for it.
they went for it. Yeah, I was so bored out of my mind, and I'd been doing websites on the side for a while there, and so I started doing my own website business, and I did that for a few years, and learned a lot of lessons, some very hard lessons and some great lessons. But the one thing it was having the freedom. It was hard to, in spite of the struggles of running a business, it was hard to want to let go of that freedom. Meanwhile, I'm listening to other podcasts and things like that. I came to the point where I got kind of burned out on doing the website design. I made a lot of mistakes. I was trying to do all the work myself. I wasn't pricing, high enough. But I came to the point I was like, I just want to kind of catch my breath, take a break. So I took a local job working with a small business, doing the online marketing for a scuba facility.
Wow.
And retail facilities. So they train people to scuba dive. And I found that pretty cool and interesting topic. I've always wanted to try scuba diving and stuff. So I ended up getting certified along with working there. And while I was working there, I really started investigating how to do podcasting and working with people. And I came to a point where that job kind of turned into, I still have to be here at a desk for 40 hours a week, looking busy. And it came to a point where, I just couldn't do it anymore. So I made a decision. I think the straw was that the manager that I'd been working with was getting ready to leave, and I was like, what better time than now to go ahead and make the change. And so I put in my notice, and that was I think it was like April. I think it was tax day in 2016 or so. So it was about 3 years ago that I jumped off full time and focusing majority of my time on podcasting.
So what's been some, like, I guess, formative experiences or something that you've learned since then that you didn't have an understanding of, like when you originally got into podcasts? Because heck, even in the last 3 years, podcasts have changed. What's that been like since you've started in podcasting to now where podcasting is now? Like, what are some of those changes that you've seen take place?
Yeah, there's been lots of changes I've seen over the years, from what topics are popular at a certain time. There's been a huge amount of growth in podcasting. I mean, just the number of new shows that are coming out. I think one thing that I've learned is a lot of people get in and don't really realize what it takes the consistency it takes. So a lot of people will quit after a short time, and sometimes it's just maybe they pick the wrong topic and they don't really have enough passion or content to talk about that week after week. But the ones that I've seen be really successful are the ones that are consistent.
Right.
And they may pivot every once in a while on what they talk about or what they focus on, but consistency is one of the big things that I've seen being an advantage for successful podcasters.
Yeah, I've seen, the same thing, and we even talked about this, at our last meeting that, people want to know when, their favorite podcast goes live at every Thursday at 2 or whatever the case may be. That's going to be there Thursday at 2. Otherwise, if you have too many of those moments, people are going to go elsewhere because they don't feel like they're being taken care of. And, content is king right now. They want their content when, it best suits them.
Yeah, they make it part of their weekly routine.
Right.
And I have some podcasters, if their podcast isn't out at the same time, maybe something happened, they got delayed, they'll start getting emails. Where's or social media messages? Where's the podcast for today? So it's always, if that happens, it's always great to see people are waiting. Yeah, they care.
Yeah, so going back to your history a little bit before podcasting, how do you think that's helped? Because you said you were involved in marketing roles, and as I'm sure anyone can have a podcast, they can have really high production quality, but a lot of it is getting it out to viewers. Like, how does marketing play into the world of podcasts?
Yeah, I think the one thing I learned in my years working as marketing is that marketing oftentimes is 80% of the work. 20% of it's creating great content, but 80% of it is marketing it. There's always people who haven't heard your podcast, so you constantly need to spend time marketing it. Some of the and I've worked with a lot of podcasters. I've talked with a lot of them. I have a lot of people. I'm in way too many podcasting online groups. And so I'm constantly hearing feedback from people. And yeah, the ones that have done really well have been the ones that have collaborated, that have used other people who might appear to be their competition to be collaborators. That way, whether it be a guest on the podcast or maybe they're sharing content with this other podcaster's audience. Also learned how to build things around a podcast, like build businesses around a podcast. A lot of people want to start a podcast and the first thing they want is a sponsorship.
Right.
Well, that's not always a good idea or even possible. But there are businesses you can build around your podcast content, whether it be, it can be anything from t-shirts to online courses to booking speaking engagements, taking your podcast content and turning it into a book, all kinds of stuff that you can build around your podcast. So you're not getting paid directly for your podcast necessarily, but your podcast is a great marketing tool that you can build products and services around.
Yeah, I think that's a big disconnect for a lot of people. They want to, again, to your point, get started, have a sponsor, and, have the podcast making the money, where in reality, one, you should just be doing a podcast because that's what you want to do, have the passion about it, talk about the things that you want to talk about. And then, even if you don't build a business around it, chances are if people find that you're passionate about it, they find value in something that you have to say and share with the audience, you're going to continually build that audience again with consistency, and then with that audience and consistency, chances are will come some sponsorships.
Yeah, it's possible that you, and even if you, there's so many benefits to podcasting beyond, even if you never make a penny with it.
Right.
I mean, just being able to sit here and talk with you is a benefit.
Right.
I learn about you, you learn about me. We'll likely be referring each other business. I've gotten a chance to talk with people who I never would have had the opportunity to talk to. I've talked with people who are Grammy winners, who are directors, who are CEOs of companies, just because I had a podcast. I mean, I literally, I didn't even have a big audience, but the fact that I had a podcast gave me, and I'm able to talk with somebody 30, 45 minutes that I never would have had the opportunity to talk to. So there's just so many, and other benefits are community. The people do it for different reasons, and that's great. It doesn't always have to be about generating business or income. There's many benefits that come from showing your expertise. And I have a client, he's a dental practice consultant, and it really helps his speaking business. And he has a guest on every week that's in the dental industry. And so he doesn't get paid directly for his podcast, but
Gives opportunities.
It gives him networking opportunities. It gives him speaking opportunities because he's got a lot of listeners that are really prime candidates for his workshops and his live workshops and stuff.
Right. Now, so outside of like building a business around it, you mentioned bringing like a community involved. What does that really entail? Because I think that's a word thrown out there, just a lot. But what does that really mean to like build a community? Like, because some people might see podcasting as like a one-way street, if you're just trying to build a business around it. But what are some ways that you've seen people successfully build a community where it benefits the listeners just as much as it does maybe the host and the guests that come on the show?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think my first taste of it was when I was listening to the 48 Days podcast when I was back in, working my office job. And so they would have, so he would take listener questions every week. So you could send him questions and he would answer them. They'd be like career related or business related. And he'd usually do like 5 questions from different listeners every week. And one day I was driving to work in my office, and I didn't even have an iPod or anything. All I had was this little laptop, and I would, before I left home, I would download the episode onto my computer, and then I would put my computer in my passenger seat and hit play and listen through my computer speaker as I'm on the way to work. And the first time he answered my question, I about drove off the road. I was like, did he just say my name? And he answered my question. And so that was like really, I could see being a part of the community. And he even created an online space that was free that people could go on and they could ask questions. It was kind of like a forum. They could ask questions. They could interact with each other. He would be on there himself, pretty much every day, answering questions, encouraging people. So that was probably my first real taste of building a community.
Now, have you ever had any experience with working as podcasts that maybe structure a nonprofit around it?
I have worked with a couple of nonprofit podcasts as far as getting them started and getting them up and running. I haven't done any like long-term relationship where I work with them on a consistent basis throughout the time, but there have been a handful that I helped them to get started.
Because that's something that we're trying to do here with the Profit Minded Business podcast between Corbin, Lynn, and I. We're still in the process of doing it, but we're going to start this as a 501c3 nonprofit and build curriculum and activities for youth groups, essentially from anyone from like elementary school all the way up to, young adults, like people my age, where um, it's it's near and dear to all of our hearts as business owners, where there's so many kids that feel the need to have like this career path picked out and go into college, build up debt, where we want to be able to, put on activities for like elementary school kids where they're doing lemonade stands, and maybe middle school age kids doing car washes, to where they're starting to build up these entrepreneurial tendencies and starting to see, oh wow, I can make money, or create something for myself without being forced down this one path. And I just wanted to see if you've kind of had any experience with structuring a nonprofit around a podcast, because I think that's going to be one of the best ways for us to be able to create a community, if we're quite literally not just sharing insight that other business owners have that we have on the podcast, but actually giving back to the community in a very real, tangible way, where we're able to give them not just curriculum, like, hey, these are some things that make a business owner successful. Here's some activities where you're hands-on, might not be an actual business, but it's still, building those tendencies from a young age, which I feel have helped me out more than anything, just working, summer jobs, or, even throughout high school, just having work experience, I think really helps. So,
Yeah.
anyway, I just thought.
Yeah, I think I love to hear that idea. And I think a podcast can be a great tool for a nonprofit, sharing stories, sharing visions, sharing practical ways to, like you said, to try out stuff and explore.
Right.
There's been a few nonprofits, I've had on my to-do list that's this long, that I've wanted to pitch, say, hey, this would be a great way to share the stories of what's going on in your nonprofit. And it's inspirational.
Right.
And it helps people really understand behind the scenes what goes on, and how people are being helped. And so I think it can be a great tool for a nonprofit.
Now, so talk a little bit about the community, the marketing side. What are some other factors that you think make a podcast successful? And we also touched on consistency. Is it primarily just content from there, or?
Yeah, I think making great, focused content consistently is a great start. I mean, it's really the foundation, I believe. In podcasting, a large majority of success is because of the niche focus of a podcast. Because it seems the more drilled down and focused it is, the better. So if I were going to do a podcast about NBA basketball, somebody scrolling through iTunes may or may not want to hear about every team in the NBA.
Right.
So maybe I drill down and I do a podcast about the Eastern Conference, and I think there's an Eastern Conference, and so that drills down. So it's people would be more likely to want to hear about a specific conference than just the NBA as a whole. But if I drill down and I do a specific team that I focus on, like if I want to do a podcast on the Hawks, then that's generally going to do better for the person who's starting from scratch. If they see a podcast about the Hawks, that's more likely going to catch their attention than a podcast about the NBA in general, or just the conference in general. So just like the TV shows, if I did if I did a podcast about all TV shows, who's going to listen to that? Right. Even if I did a podcast about sitcoms, that's still not really specific. But if I do a podcast about the Big Bang Theory, then people are going to know that's what it's about, and it's focused content. Now, obviously, there's exceptions to this.
Right.
People who already have some sort of platform or following those are more personality based, so they often can talk about more different things and have more latitude. But even people who are niche focused podcasts, a lot of times will bring other things in, like sharing about their own life and building community and things like that. So I would say for the majority that really having a focus is prime. Something to make you stand out.
Yeah, you mentioned, especially if you have a following, it's really easier because you already have people that just want to know what you have to say, what's going on in your life. Something that was just going through my head when you were talking about niches that might be another exemption to the rule, but in a different space. And TV, Seinfeld, right? I mean, look how popular that is, and it's widely regarded as the show about nothing, But it's all personality driven. You're watching to see what type of shenanigans Kramer was getting into, what George was complaining about, the non-problems that Jerry had, So it's interesting how there are so many different ways to go about starting a podcast. What I'm, hearing and just going through my head right now is maybe the most important thing is just starting, If you have something that you want to talk about that, you think people would benefit from, hearing, even if it's not something that you yourself or have something to say, but as a guest, just giving people that opportunity to, increase the perspective of their life that they wouldn't have otherwise. Again, just a great opportunity.
Yeah, one of the things that I ask people on the front end, potential clients, is what will you consider success? What will make this successful for you? And for some people, one guy says, man, if after 6 months in, if I just have 100 dedicated listeners, this will be a success for me. And for others, it's like, well, if I can get a couple of clients a quarter, a couple of new clients a quarter, that'd be great. Right. For others, it's like, I just love networking and talking to people, my heroes. I mean, that's a lot of people do it. They get a chance to talk to their heroes. It's great. Right. Some people want to be more of a journalist, and so they get because they have a podcast, they get press passes to certain things, and there's so many different reasons that people do it, and so many definitions of success that different people have. And then occasionally you get that person who's like, I want my show to, within 3 months, be getting 10,000 downloads per episode, and for sponsors to be knocking at my door and all this kind of stuff. And so I have to set some realistic expectations, right, based on where they are. But yeah, there's so many benefits, and I've seen people who started out with one topic, decided they had said all they wanted about that, and pivoted. And I know one lady, she's like on her third different show, and that show just really, really hit and has done very well for her. She's been able to build a business around it. But she probably wouldn't have gotten to there if she hadn't started this show that was about another topic and decided, hey, I'm kind of done with that. I'm ready to move on to something else. There's always the opportunity to pivot, and you may end up podcasting about something totally different a year from now as you grow, as you learn, right? And so there's always opportunity to pivot. Like my mentor Cliff, he did this show called The Podcast Answer Man for several years. And then he decided he wanted to branch out and be more of a business life type coach. And so after he had built this whole brand, he pivoted and said, now it's the Cliff Ravenscraft show, and we're going to talk about broader things than just podcasting.
So, and kind of wrapping up, we typically ask our guests, what's something that, along the way that they've learned that people getting started in their own business, but maybe we talk specifically about podcasts this episode, that you think would be the most important takeaway for someone that has an idea for a business or a podcast that they want to build around a business, or just a podcast to talk about, their favorite TV show. What would that maybe one single piece of advice be?
Yeah, I think it's something you brought up earlier is get started. So many people get in the weeds of research and watching YouTube videos and how I should do this, how I should do that. And there's nothing wrong with that to a certain extent, but a lot of people use it as reasons to procrastinate, or they might even be scared. I know one guy who ended up being very successful, and he was scared for months to release his podcast.
It's intimidating.
Yeah, I mean, it's scary to put it out there, but and sometimes you need somebody just to an encourager, just to encourage, hold you accountable for that. So, just like you said earlier, starting is I think the big step, and you can always adjust from there. Once you get going, you may make 10 episodes that suck, but that's okay.
Right.
You're learning from it, you're doing it, and that's really the only way to really, I think, hone your skills and hone your topic and get to a point where you're starting to become comfortable with it. And it kind of takes shape as you go. You'll learn things that work, learn things that don't.
Right, like I remember, our last conversation, I kind of showed you that one podcast, I mentioned Painkiller already, how they started off where there was no video and they were all just coming together on a Skype call. And then after there was no video, then they started overlaying it on Call of Duty gameplay, and then they used Google Hangouts. And it's all right to evolve and grow over time as long as you just get started. And while many people might be turned off starting with just a cell phone and the audio recorder, I mean, that is a viable way if you really want to get started but don't have the money to, buy microphones, do video. I mean, it's viable. Now, just stepping up above that, what do you think would be the best starter equipment for someone to get that? Maybe they have a budget of $500, $1,000, at the high end, and they're like, okay, I see this as an investment. What would you kind of recommend for them to get started as far as the audio recording equipment, where they might maybe host it, stuff like that, where they can go from essentially nothing to having a podcast out there on iTunes or Spotify or something like that?
Sure. One of my favorite mics that I recommend to entry level people is it's only $65.
Wow.
And it's a mic that can be USB, or it can use a standard mic cable. And I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, it's probably 7.5 or 8 in audio quality. And it's very easy to use. You can plug in USB if you want to in your computer. Bring up some Audacity audio software. It's free download, and you can record that way. If you want to spend a little more, I really like digital recorders, particularly the Zoom digital recorders like the H4n, the H5, the H6. Those are great because you can just plug a microphone directly into those, and actually several microphones directly into them, and hit the record button. And those are great for all, you're not even changing the computer.
And that's actually what we use here for all those watching or listening. I mean, it really doesn't take much. As long as you have something to record audio, you have the foundation of a podcast, and anything you add on from there is just gravy, essentially.
Yeah. I've seen people do it with just the $65 mic to get started,
Right.
and it gives you great audio quality. And then the Zoom recorders are great for especially if you're on the go or if you ever do anything remotely. You don't even have to be carrying your computer around. It's about the size of a big cell phone, really.
Yeah, and that's a great point where we actually got started where we didn't have a Zoom that we could do more than two XLR or microphone inputs. So we did have to start off with a computer, having an actual little audio interface set up, and having a Zoom, because our first podcast we did had like 4 or 5 people on it, and the audio quality suffered. But again, we still just got started with what we had. And then, we're still changing every episode. As Jody saw some behind the scenes, I mean, it's an ever evolving kind of process to, get up and running. And then, even once you're up and running, it's still going to change. You look at any big podcast out there, go watch or listen to episode 1 as opposed to where they're at episode 200, 300, 500, 1,000. It's going to be vastly different.
Yes, I've seen some very successful podcasters, and some of the early episodes were just, you listen to them now, they almost make you cringe. I'm sure it makes them cringe, but they kind of will have it out there as a badge of honor. It's like, this is how I started with this,
Right.
and went from there. I started with simple beginnings.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has to start somewhere, so wherever you start, some people have a leg up. They might already have a following, and that's great. But if it is something that you're really passionate about, wanting to talk about and share experiences, start with a cell phone, start with a $65 mic, and grow from there. Is there anything else that you would like to maybe add on that people may or may not know about you, podcasting, or anything of that regard?
Yeah, I would just say don't get all in the weeds. I see so many people worried about, I have to set up all these social media profiles for my podcast, and I need to get this in order, and I have to have my website built out. And, that's just not the case. Don't get in all the weeds of it. Remember that the podcast itself is a product that you put out there. So you don't have to have everything in place around it to get started. And so that's one thing I help people do, is just help get out of the weeds, help them see objectively, help them make decisions on what needs to happen. So I would just say, get in the game,
Right.
give it a try. It's not like you're locked in. You may choose to do a podcast for a brief period of time and then change topics, or you may have a topic that you talk about for years.
Right.
So just get in the game and just evaluate, each time you do an episode.
Now, one last thing about putting it out there. What would be the one platform that you suggest people, if they're not going to put it anywhere else, maybe 2, if you recommend 2, and how would you go about setting up just a very initial, you're doing the basic audio recording with one microphone, where do you post it?
Yeah, so the most important places right now would be Apple Podcast, also known as iTunes. The last numbers I checked, they're about 60%
Wow.
of the listening market. A big up-and-comer is Spotify. They're around like 7 to 8% of the podcast listening market. So those are 2 I would definitely encourage you to. Google Podcasts is a new initiative that Google's been doing the last few months. And they actually will crawl the web and discover your podcast, so you don't submit it to them directly. And as long as you have a way for people with Apple products and people with Android products, that's the main thing. And one great place to create an Android-friendly link is a website called Subscribe on Android. And you can create a link that will enable your Android people to subscribe, because often they get left out. A lot of podcasters just put a link for iTunes and nobody for an Android. And Android is a, big, probably half the devices out there at least are Android. So,
Right.
yeah, definitely. So definitely the biggest percentage wise right now are going to be Apple and Spotify, but also make a way for Android devices as well.
Okay. Now, if people are wanting to get started with their own podcast, how do they reach out to you? Where do they go? What are the types of people that you want reaching out to you? Just let us know where the audience can find you.
Yeah, so I have a very generic name for my website. I just use my name. It's jodysmith.com, and that's spelled JODEYSMITH.com. You can go there. I have a very simple website. It has some testimonials on there. There's a contact form. You can send me a message. Tell me what you're looking to do, and I'll normally set up a call that we can chat for 15-20 minutes about where you are, what you're looking to do, and I'll tell you if I'm able to help you. There's been people that have contacted me and they thought they wanted to invest a lot of money on a certain podcast, but by the time I got done talking to them, I said, you probably want to go back and refine this before you start investing money and time into it. So, I'm very objective about giving people feedback on whether they're a good candidate or not. And I'm glad to talk with pretty much anybody who's interested in doing a podcast.
All right. So thank you, Jody, for coming on. I know I certainly took a lot away from that, as we're still at the very early stages of our own podcast, but I think this is going to be really helpful for a lot of people that, are hesitant to get started. And I can't thank you enough for kind of sharing your insight from a firsthand experience working with so many. So,
Right, it's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the invitation.
absolutely. So that was Profit Minded Business Podcast with Jacob Andrews and Jody Brycely. Or Jody Smith. Anyway, thank you, Jody.